Hi, welcome to another episode of Firm Foundations podcast with your hosts CJ and Tony. Today we are going to be going into chapter 9, or actually finishing up chapter 9 and going into, God willing, chapter 10 of Genesis. And um, we're going to be discussing some interesting events.
For sure.
That's for sure. And also looking at the biblical names of some ancient civilizations and trying to put biblical narrative within its historical context and bridge the gap and help people, including ourselves, better understand the linkages between what we know in history from um, global sources, historical sources, and scholarship, as well as what we know from the Bible, and getting a better understanding to see that the Bible and science, the Bible and history are not at odds. Um, that the Word of God is not some ancient story that is limited in value. Rather, we're going to see that the endeavor of this channel is to see that, the Word of God is sweet and valuable and life giving and reliable. Um, so
Are we
let's
ready to
start
get
our
started?
journey today.
All right, so here we go. Verse 18 out of chapter 9. Now the sons of Noah who went out of the ark were Shem, Ham, and Japheth. Or Japheth, right? Because there's no J.
Yeah.
And Ham was the father of Canaan. These three were the sons of Noah, and from these the whole earth was populated. And Noah began to be a farmer, and he planted a vineyard. Then he drank of the wine and was drunk and became uncovered in his tent. And Ham, the father of Canaan, saw the nakedness of his father and told his two brothers outside. But Shem and Japheth took a garment, laid it on both their shoulders, and went backward and covered the nakedness of their father. Their faces were turned away, and they did not see their father's nakedness. Um, so, you want to do this rabbit hole now?
Yeah, just early on, we're going to get going.
I was noticing, that word Canaan has been brought up several times. And we were talking about the nakedness of his father. And we're talking about the order of Shem, Ham, and Japheth.
Yeah.
Who was the oldest, who was the youngest, and it's a little bit murky. But we've come to the deciding factor for us that it's actually Shem, Ham, and Japheth is the order of. And there's going to be a little argument in verse 24. I think it's 24 or further down. But anyway, we're going to see this that may make a difference depending on how you read it. But what's the deal with this? With Ham seeing his father's nakedness. Let's hit that rabbit hole real quick.
You know what? Can we hit another rabbit hole, a potential rabbit hole before that?
Yeah, let's have it. There's
because I literally, as you were reading, just remembered something that is interesting. In verse 20, it says, "And Noah began to be a farmer, and he planted a vineyard."
Mm-hmm.
Now, in the Jewish Publication Society translation, it says, "And Noah debased himself and began to be a vine dresser, and became or and he planted a vineyard." And why do they say he debased himself? Because the word translated as begun is halal, and it can mean both to begin or to debase oneself, um, especially in that form. So the idea is that Noah, he was a righteous man, But you know, after the flood, perhaps the flood was so um, tragic and so
Hmm.
jarring that he kind of like a kind of like a PTSD moment for Noah, and potentially was trying to drown the
Memory of
pain
it,
and
yeah.
memory
Hmm.
away by drinking a lot of wine. And we see that he drank a lot of
Because
wine. But
you can imagine being in that boat, and though you can't see outside it, you could probably hear the screams because there had
oh
to be
yeah,
people around that boat, and
yeah,
you hear the screams of people yelling, help
yeah,
us, and
yeah. And you know what's more jarring than the screams?
the silence.
The silence after the screams.
Hmm.
I I do not even want to think about that, but too late now.
Right.
But the idea is that Noah was the first person to become what the old translations in John 15 would say a husbandman, a vine dresser, someone who plants and tends to rows and rows of vines, meaning he had the ability to almost industrially produce wine.
Hmm.
I mean, that's a lot of wine, and he's making use of it. Um, Even in the verses that we read, he got drunk and became uncovered in his tent. Now, we're not going to go into a whole. We're not going to chase down the rabbit hole about wine, um, but for the benefit of our um, more conservative American and Korean viewers, maybe that see wine as a sin, and they're going to look at this and say, "See,
Hmm.
it's a sin." I'm just going to point out that, and then um, they'll try to tweak the passage in the New Testament where Jesus performs his first miracle and say that, oh, see, it's not really wine because it's not alcoholic. It's non-alcoholic wine, whatever that means
Uh-huh.
in that day. But Psalms 104 makes it clear that God created wine to make people's hearts glad. Now, I like a little drink, a little grape juice. I love it, but it's not going to make my heart smile. So the admonition stands: don't get drunk on wine, but be
Hmm.
filled with the Holy Spirit. It doesn't mean that you can't enjoy or that enjoying it is a sin. It just means know your limits and respect those limits that God has placed on you.
Don't be a glutton.
Yeah, beautiful. Nobody says eating's a sin, but gluttony's a sin.
Hmm.
Now, moving on from
Oh
that,
yeah.
the so that his drunkenness opens the door to something much um, darker to take place in the Bible. Um, the only other place I think that the Bible uses to uncover one's nakedness is actually, I thought it was in second or yeah second Kings, but actually it's in Leviticus
Right. Yeah,
eighteen
because he was
seven
given the
and 8.
law not to be with your mother's brother, and your father's mother, and so on and so forth.
Yeah,
Yeah.
but in Leviticus 7 and 8, it's specifically talking about sleeping with your own mother because
Hmm.
she is your father's nakedness, as well as sleeping with your father's wife, i.e., his second wife or concubines. So basically, the other woman that your father is married to, when back in the day when um, polygamy was tolerated, don't sleep with any women that your father's married to, including your mother and all the others. So because of that usage within the context of the Bible, and since the authors of Leviticus and Genesis are the same. They're both Moses.
Hmm.
I know there are other theories from secular religious scholars, which is an oxymoron. I mean, if you're secular, why are you um, a scholar of religion? But uh, we don't hold to those views in this case because um, I think indigenous people know their history a little bit better than what Westerner might know or think they know. So we're going to go with Moses being the author. That doesn't mean that there weren't other scribes that came along later on and um, made notes within the text to help readers at their time understand it better. We see that in several places, actually. So there's evidence that there were scribes that made annotations and notes within the text or around the margins of the text that later on got incorporated in during um, the transmission of the manuscripts, transmission of the text. But these annotations, these notations do not change the meaning of the text. It doesn't alter the message regarding salvation or anything important. So basically, what I'm saying is yes, there are textual variants, but they are negligible. They don't, as far as theology goes, um, the Bible is wonderfully preserved. Um, for any more information on that, you can check up. You can check out Wes Huff and his um, website and his videos on YouTube. He famously was on Joe Rogan a couple months ago. Um, there was big waves in the YouTube world. Um, so avail yourselves of that marvelous resource. But going back to the text here at hand, so the idea that Ham uncovered his father's nakedness or saw his father's nakedness is a allusion to some very unsavory actions of incest between a mother and her uh, potentially maybe youngest son.
Hmm.
We're going to discuss that later. It's going to be a little. It's going to get a little clearer. Um, but yeah, and not only did he do this horrible thing, but he went and boasted to his brothers about it. Um, it we were talking earlier about this, and I shout out to Ruslan, um, also on YouTube if you haven't heard of him. He's a good Christian content creator. He has a little button that you can push on his soundboard that makes a perfect audio cue for this, um, where he says in a very funny way, "It is a sickness of the highest order." That is exactly what this is.
Yeah, that's and I never read it that way until you brought it up to me about the nakedness.
Yeah,
I always took it, just face value, where he just seen his dad naked, and as I was telling you earlier, probably laughed at his dad being naked and drunk on the floor, and then went and told his brothers, oh, come here and look at dad. He's all naked and drunk and passed out on the floor. But and as we'll see later on, but the when you brought up the fact of what nakedness meant in Leviticus, uh, gives it a different viewpoint. It
yeah,
makes a lot of sense,
yes.
especially because Canaan is mentioned a couple times in here, which is kind of odd because uh,
Who's Canaan?
you know the son of
Nobody's mentioned
the
Canaan yet until
the
now.
son of Ham. You
Yeah,
know, that's right at the very first verse that we read in verse 18, and then again in verse 22. It specifically said, and Ham, the father of Canaan, and Ham, the father of Canaan. Uh, must be a significant reason. And, we talked about Noah's capabilities at his age, maybe. It doesn't say he had more than one wife.
yeah,
Uh, and uh, so we don't know for sure if any of this happened, because it doesn't say, but the implication is from we'll see in a minute about curses and such.
yeah.
So
I mean, and there's besides the illusion being there, the a phrase that signals a certain type of deviancy being there. There's also a curious wording um, that we're going to see when Noah is cursing um, Canaan, and um, yeah, it and then also like you said, the 2 3 times where it says and Ham, the father of Canaan.
mhm.
The fact that he's bringing Canaan in here before we even find out Canaan was born.
He's being singled out. you
Yeah,
know, that's what you normally do when you're singling out a person, is you'll say their name
yeah,
several times so that you know pay attention. This is significant. This is what we're wanting to show you. Uh, uh, what happens in a certain situation? It could be good or bad.
yeah,
Unfortunately, this leads to a bad situation, but it was all in the plan. So, uh,
yeah,
but you know, and we had talked about maybe Ham was the youngest because he did something this stupid.
yeah,
Because, like I told you earlier, I'm the last born, and I always did stupid, goofy stuff. And my siblings would be like, why don't you grow up? They're still telling me that, by the way. I'm 63, and they're still telling me to grow up. Uh, should I go ahead and read on here, or is there
yeah.
something else that you was going to cover on
I
that?
mean, no, just to reiterate, we originally thought Hum might be the youngest, but we're gonna discuss why he might actually be the middle child. But
Hmm.
other than that, I think we've beat this horse
Okay.
dead.
Verse 24. So Noah awoke from his wine and knew what his younger son had done to him. Then he said, "Cursed be Canaan." There's Canaan again. A servant of servants he shall be to his brethren. And he said, "Blessed be the Lord to God of Shem, and may Canaan be his servant. May God enlarge Japheth, and may he dwell in the tents of Shem, and may Canaan be his servant." And Noah lived after the flood 350 years. So all the days of Noah were 950 years, and he died. So before you jump into this, I
Yeah,
just want to make it clear that, you know, from the passages that we've read beforehand, whenever you read about somebody uh, in their last days, like this says Noah lived after the flood 350 years, it doesn't say and had sons and daughters. All we're given is these three sons, that he may have only had just these three sons, because it's kind of odd that it doesn't say and had sons and daughters and died at his ripe old age of 950.
yeah,
Uh, and to me, that's a curiosity, which may lead into what happened with Ham, because of his maybe he was incapable of being with his wife.
yeah. That is a possibility. Now, as you were saying, it might, as like I said, we were talking about it earlier, and like you said, then it might have been that uh, Noah's wife, which we think might have been Naamah, the descendant of um, Cain, probably a source of um, genetic material from the Nephilim, um, she might have seduced her own son. I don't know. I'm still not there,
Mhm.
but that is a potentiality. The Bible doesn't say it. The Bible doesn't even really hint at it. But who knows? All we know is something horrible happened, it's interesting here that it says Noah awoke from his wine and knew what his younger son had done to him, and done to him
Mhm.
is more than saw him. That's another hint at Ham's sin against him through incest.
Yeah, it's like this may have happened and nothing's realized at first because it takes 9 months to have a child. But then he notices his wife is getting bigger and bigger,
Yeah.
and realizes, because not everything is automatic. Like this sounds like he just wakes up and he curses all of a sudden, but this is an awakening that he finds out
It
that his
could
wife
be.
is pregnant.
It could be. See, that's interesting the way you said, because when I read it, I think, oh, as he was drunk, doesn't mean he didn't see it. He might have just been too drunk to do anything about it,
Mhm.
and he saw it, so he knew. But like you said, it could be that as time went along, as she became visible, or her pregnancy became visible, that he realized what happened.
Mhm.
Um, Either way,
And of course, uh, the curse could have been before Canaan was born, and the author, of course, finding out that Canaan was the child that he's talking about, went ahead and just put his name in there. So it could have been, cursed be this child. You know,
yeah.
he could have said it before or after the
So just to make it,
if that happened.
so just to make it clear, we're saying that Kenan might have been Ham's son from his own mother,
Mhm.
which is a trope of many redneck jokes. Um, my mother was my grandmother.
Mhm.
My father was my uncle. Jeez. But yeah, we barely even know who Kenan is, and like you said, it it is apparent that he was singling him out for this specific moment to tell us something about Kenan and the circumstances that he was
Mhm.
born in, specifically. Um, mm,
So I mean, just some things just add up.
yeah,
The fact that uh, he sees his father's nakedness. Uh, there's no mention of him having any more sons and daughters. Which is really odd considering every other one of them said it. You know,
yeah,
uh, so and people are people, uh, and you hear of incest, off and on, and they were no different than us back then. Uh, you know, they sinned just like we do, and we had discussion of the possibility of Noah not being able to have kids later on in his older age may have drove his wife to like no better way to say this than I need a man.
yeah,
uh, and now they've been caught if that's the case, uh, uh, of in their sin, and now we see why Canaan's name may have been brought up so much because of that. Because there's no other name that has been brought up like his, uh, in this chapter, and or in the next chapter, really, as
yeah,
far as being cursed. So there's got to be something significant about Canaan being cursed.
yeah,
It can't be just because, hey, Dad, I seen you naked. I mean, okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's not,
Yeah,
you know.
and that's another thing. It's Ham that saw him naked. Why are you cursing Kenan?
Mhm.
What did Kenan do to you?
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah,
So
and why Kenan? Why not one of the other three children that Ham has? He has
we're
four kids.
yep,
Why Kenan?
and I think we'll look at that in the chapter 10. It's coming up real quick.
Yeah.
um, but is there anything else in chapter 9 we want to look back at, and before we move on to 10?
I'd say you just remember Kenan.
Yeah.
Just remember Kenan, and remember how it counts the sons of Noah, Shem, Ham, and Japhet, in that order,
Hmm.
and then we're going to compare that chapter 10 to the order of how the grandbabies are listed.
Right. Well, okay. We'll get into chapter 10, and we're going to be reading these genealogies, so just bear with us because he's going to explain some of these things and where in history they belong,
Yeah.
as far as the area uh, in the Middle East there.
Yeah.
Now, this is the genealogy of the sons of Noah. Shem, Ham, and Japheth, and sons were born to them after the flood. The sons of Japheth were Gomer, Magog, Madai, Javan, Tubal, Meshach, and Tyrus. The sons of Gomer were Ashkenaz, Rephath, and Togarmah. Togarmah?
Yeah.
Okay. The sons of Javan were Elisha, Tarshish, Kittim, and Dodanim. From these, the coastland peoples of the Gentiles were separated into their lands, everyone according to his language, according to their families, into their nations. Um, so let me, I'm going to throw a kink in this because this kind of, it just hit me. Uh, according to his language. So are we having different languages already before the Tower of Babel?
Well, the very next chapter is going to be the Tower of
Yes, it
Babel,
is.
and
Yes, it is.
I ideally I would have discussed that, and we probably would have wrestled with that there, but um, long story short, the way I see chapter 11, the Tower of Babel, is like uh, many other passages, many other events that are recorded in the Bible, uh, simultaneously refer to two or three different events as if they were one single event. And for various reasons that we'll discuss then, I've always, well, not always, but the last few years especially, seen the Tower of Babel and the events associated with that as the uh, as one of those passages in the Bible that touch on several events at once. And like you said here, it actually provides evidence for that
Mm-hmm.
because, like you said, like we read, it talks about all these nations having their own languages. And see, all these nations are dividing before the Tower of Babel.
Okay.
Um, why? What's going on?
Could this be uh, actually what happened? It's like the author is telling you what's going to happen before the actual happening.
That is one interpretation.
Mm-hmm.
That could be one way of understanding it. So it's basically telling you what happens before it happens, or it could be equally likely talking about two separate dispersions. One that is more global, as in, right after Noah, in the first couple generations, people are spreading out.
Hmm.
Or it could be, well, this is what happens after the Tower of Babel when people disperse. I tend to think that it's actually two separate dispersions. Um, because of the historical record, the archaeological record, as well as um, just the language used in these passages. Um, for instance, we're given the genealogy or the early um, origins of the Greeks in these first few verses of chapter 10. Uh, Yavan, or Javan, as you said,
Yeah.
is the ancestor of the Greeks. And Tarshish, Kittim, specifically those two well, Kittim is specifically the island of Cyprus, and the Greek um, inhabitants of the island.
Hmm.
Tarshish, which is interesting. Growing up in Turkey, I always recognized a similarity between the musical traditions of Turks and Greeks and Spanish, or the Iberians, I should say, in general. And it's interesting because Tarshish is the Hebrew name for Spain, or the Iberian Peninsula proper. So it's interesting that they're um, both related. They both come from the same ancestor, and they have similar musical um, heritages. Not exactly the same. Don't get me wrong, but um, guess what? If you play Spanish music in Greece or Turkey, people are going to dance. If you play Greek music in Turkey or Spain, people are going to dance. There's something about it that just excites
Clicks.
the human soul in these
Yeah.
places, right? Um, another,
What about Donanim?
Dodanim, I'm not that familiar with it, to be honest, or Elisha.
Uh-huh.
Um, it just hasn't been. Um, I probably learned who they were today and forgot about it,
Okay.
because I didn't have a personal
Well,
connection to them.
well, there's a lot in here. So,
Yeah,
so those were the sons of Japheth. Uh, and again, that never says anything about daughters uh,
yeah,
very much because they're not. Go ahead.
yeah. I was just thinking, earlier we said pay attention to the order in which the sons are listed in
Hmm.
chapter 10 or chapter
Chapter
9.
9, yeah.
And now in chapter 10, we were going to discuss how the grandbabies of Noah are listed uh, in order. They're ordered by their fathers. So
Hmm.
Shem, Ham, and Japhet. And then it's going to discuss their children.
So
But it starts with Japhet
Japheth's
first.
first. So what's the deal? Is he the oldest or is he not?
Well,
And
we're
there's a there's a verse in here, verse 10 and 24, I think it is.
yeah,
I said that in 9, but it's actually chapter 10. And it's gonna be a question because it could be read two different ways.
yeah.
But let's go on with verse 6. The sons of Ham. Okay, so
Hmm.
he's put in there second in the middle again.
So who's going to be the last one? Let me guess. If it was Japhet and Ham, the third one's going to be Shem, right? It has to be.
Well, I hope.
So how do we know what the order of their birth was?
Right.
I think Japhet was the youngest, Canaan was the middle, or Ham was the middle, and Shem was the eldest.
Hmm.
Um, I also believe that they were triplets. and they came out
Oh,
in
you think so?
order. Yeah, I think that some scholars believe that is the case, especially Jewish commentators believe it's the case because they're mentioned in the same breath whenever they're mentioned,
Hmm.
as far as births go. They're mentioned in one breath, so it seems to be the case that they were triplets. That Shem came out first, Ham came out next, and Japhet came out last. And as we're going to see, the Bible is going now from a global view to a very localized view,
Hmm.
and the 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 mention of the children of the sons of Noah in this order kind of brings our attention onto Shem, as we're going to see. We're going to see why Shem and his descendants are the last ones to be mentioned, because the focus is going to be on, from here on out, it's going to
On
be
Shem's
on
descendants.
Shem's descendants.
Hmm.
And that's why he's mentioned last here. It's not because it's going by the birth necessarily, it's going in reverse, because also, as we're going to see, Ham's descendants, some of them, are going to be very closely intertwined throughout millennia with Shem's descendants. There's going to be a lot of pain and suffering caused um, by their interactions, let's say. And um, yeah.
All right. Verse 6. So the sons of Ham were Cush, Mizraim, Put, and Canaan. The sons of Cush were Seba, Havilah, Sabta, Raama, and Sabchika. That's a good one. And the sons of Raama were Sheba and Dedan. Cush
Mm.
begot Nimrod. He began to be a mighty one on the earth. He was a mighty hunter before the Lord. Therefore, it is said, like Nimrod, the mighty hunter before the Lord. And the beginning of his kingdom was Babel, Erech, Akkad, Calneh, in the land of Shinar. From that land he went to the Assyria and built Nineveh, Rehoboth, Calah, and Rezin between Nineveh and Calah. That is the principal city. Mizraim was
Okay.
Mizraim. You want to go ahead?
Yeah, let's stop here because there's several things, right? Um, the sons of Ham were Cush, which is modern day Ethiopia and Sudan area. Mitzrayim to this day is the Hebrew name for Egypt. It's the Egyptians. Put is the region of Libya, in right next to Egypt in North Africa on the um, Mediterranean coast, and then Canaan. And we already talked about how Canaan was born and his depravity. We in an earlier episode we mentioned that his mother, Noah's wife, might have been Nama, the only daughter to be mentioned till that point, from Cain's line, and it seems like she might have been a descendant of the Nephilim, that the Bible talks in chapter 6 of Genesis.
Possibly carrying the DNA of Nephilim, which
Uh,
is why they have giants after the flood.
yeah, which
Possibility.
exactly, yeah. Um, and as you know, the Nephilim were descendants of the sons of God. It says, which is um, the sons of God it's a specific term, um, that means just angelic beings. And so these were the fallen angels that we hear about
Mhm.
repeatedly in literature and um, various channels out there in YouTube land. But so she already has some wickedness otherworldly wickedness inside of her. Um, and she's, if this is a genetic mutation like we think, then it can be present in some kids and not present in some kids. In this case, we it looks like it was in Ham, and when Ham, who has it,
Ham or Canaan?
Ham, Ham. But I'm getting to
Oh,
Canaan.
okay.
If this mutation expresses itself in Ham and in Ham's mother, then their incest would have brought about a child with a much greater likelihood of having that mutation. Um, and this is going to be important as we continue down the biblical narrative with regards to different nations and the giants that we see that existed in the land of uh, at the time of King David and, well, the judges and King David, and even to this day, this has some ramifications, geopolitical ramifications, which I'm sure we'll probably touch on, because it's a uh, sensitive topic for me. But um, another thing is uh, Cush, or sorry, Rama. Where is it? Seven. Okay, and the sons of Cush were, and one of the last two. Okay, so Rama was Cush's son, and his sons were Sheba and Dedan, and we know Sheba from the Queen of Sheba, uh, Queen of Sheba fame, who came to visit King David, or King Solomon, I should say,
Mhm.
um, in Jerusalem. Now, who are the Shebites? They lived in southernmost areas of Saudi Arabia, what is today Saudi Arabia, and Yemen and Oman. Um, so again, more thoughts for our modern geopolitical situation with what's going on right now. Famously, the U.S. just declared a one-sided truce with the Houthis in Yemen,
Mm-hmm.
which is where Sheba was. Um, and then it starts talking about Nimrod, right? Another son of Cush, and it singles Nimrod out for a little bit of a extended narrative.
Mm-hmm.
And this is interesting because in this part it says, "And the beginning of his kingdom was Babel," so Babylon. Later, well, I'm not going to say Babylon. I'm just going to say Babel, because Babylon is a specific term, not just the name of a single city. There's even as early as the Sumerian period, there were 5, 6 cities that were known to be Babylons, um, and Babylon was just one city amongst many that was a Babylon. So we're going to discuss that later when we're talking about the Tower of Babel, what Babylon means specifically. But the beginning of his kingdom was Bavel, Erech, which is the Hebrew, um, one of the ways of pronouncing the name of another famous Sumerian city, which is Uruk. Akkad, which from that we get the Akkadians, which later supplanted the Sumerians, um, Kalne, and the land of Shinar. Land of Shinar is interesting because traditionally it's translated as Babel, or the land of Babylon. So Shinar is the name of the general region, and Babel itself is the name of the city. And like I said, Babel is one of the many Babylons in antiquity. Um, just it's not mentioned here, and that name will not be mentioned actually in the Bible at all. But another city in ancient Sumer that was said to be a Babylon was the city of Borsippa, and we're going to talk about that a little more when we get to the Tower of Babel, and it'll be clear why. Um, just little things to look forward to. From the land, he went to Assyria, which is where we get the modern Assyrian Orthodox Christians in um, Syria, Turkey, um, Lebanon, Israel, and Iraq. And there's actually, I think, more Assyrians living in the US, Brazil, France than there are living in the Middle East today, unfortunately, if I'm not mistaken. Um, but that's another interesting thing because, especially, Assyria is singled out, and it's talking about the land of Assyria, specifically three, four of their cities, with Nineveh being the capital of the empire that would come later on. And the Bible is talking specifically about these places because later on it's going to be important. Later on, we're going to see the city of Nineveh in the lives of some of the prophets and some of the military campaigns against Israel and Judah and Jerusalem. Um, but yeah, so that's what I got.
uh, wasn't it Jonah that went to Nineveh?
Yeah.
Okay.
Um,
Ended
yeah.
up going fishing. Here's the fish bait.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. Let's see. I believe I finished with 11.
Yeah.
Okay. Verse 12. And Rezin between
Oh,
Nineveh
no.
and Calah.
I think you read that. Doesn't
Okay.
matter.
That's great. That's the principal. Yeah, I did because that's the principal city. Mizraim begot Ludin, Anamim, Lahibim, and Naphtuim. Parth, Pathrizim and Kazluhim, from who came the Philistines and Caphtorim.
Now, this is interesting here, verse 14. Did you have anything you wanted to say
No,
about
because
these
I mean,
names?
you know all about these.
Oh, I don't
These
know
names are
all
just like
about them, but
way over. I recognize the Philistines.
yeah. Yeah.
That was the easiest one. I was like, well, I know the Philistines, Go Goliath, right?
Who would have thought I would cheer for
A Philistine.
yeah.
Yeah.
But interesting thing here is the way they translated it. The Hebrew is not as clear as this translation makes it sound. There are other translations that say Patrushim and Kasluhim and Kaftorim, from whom the Philistines came. So from the Hebrew, it's that the Philistines either came from the Pasluhim, no, sorry, Kasluhim, or from the Kasluhim and the Kaftorim. And why this is interesting is because, today there's people of Arab descent that live in Gaza and um, what lamestream media and politicians like to call the West Bank, which is actually the biblical heartland of Israel, Judea and Samaria. Right? It's there's no place called West Bank throughout history. It's Judea and Samaria. And why is this interesting? It says, oh, see, the Palestinians were already there, right? The problem with that is that the Palestinians of the Bible are not the Palestinians that live in Gaza and Judea and Samaria today. The Gazans, the so-called Palestinians today, are of Arab descent. They are not the original peoples of the region. They came there as colonizers, as invaders, uh, after Islam was born in the 7th century. Um, in fact, they didn't take over a majority of Israel till the 11th century. So, who are these Philistines that the Bible is talking about? Well, they're descendants of Kasluhim and Kaftorim. Kaftor is the biblical name for an island in the Mediterranean that we today know as Crete, which is where my grandmother hails from. Um, like I said, I have family connections, and that's what makes me interested in this. But amongst other things, but um, so for for us today, why is this important? It's mainly a geopolitical issue. When we hear about the poor Palestinians, and people say Israel is colonizers and whatever, it's the other way around. Israel is the native people of the land. Mark Twain, when he visited Israel or you know, the back then it was called the um, Levant. Uh, he said nobody lives here. The whole land was empty. Just a few Jewish homes here and there, some Christian families here and there. There weren't that many Muslim Arabs even in the 19th century because the Ottoman Turks did not allow them to move there for the most part. The Ottomans chose to sell the land to the Jews and the French mostly. There's parts of Israel today that are actually owned by the French government. And if Israel wants to do archaeological digs, they have to get permission from the French because the Ottomans sold it to them instead of giving it to the Arabs. And the reason is because Arabs are not native to the land and they caused a lot of problems even back then for the Ottomans. So that's that. The real Palestinians no longer exist. They, throughout generations over millennia, between the Romans and the Assyrians and the Babylonians and their constant harassment of Israel and um, Egyptian, ancient Egyptians, they've disappeared. They've ceased to exist as a people, but they were of Greek origin. They came from the part of them came from uh, Kasluch, and part of them came from Kaftor, modern day Crete. So the more you know.
So I got a question because I've thought about this before. When the land of Israel was given to
Yeah.
Abraham, uh, it stretched from down where the Palestinians are occupying right now, all the way to the north.
Hmm.
Does Israel uh, will that all that land need to be occupied by Israel again before the
Hmm.
return of the Messiah?
I don't think so because if you actually look at the borders of the promised land actually are threefold. There's three different descriptions of the land given by God. One was the immediate area, um, around Israel today. One is, like you said, from Gaza all the way to the Euphrates. Um, the other one, the most extensive uh, map described,
Mhm.
borders described by the God's promise, is actually from the Nile to Euphrates. Um, I don't think Israel's going to have to occupy the whole land because Isaiah 14, I believe, either 14 or 19, I always forget, talks of, talks about Assyria and Egypt worshiping together with Israel. And if you go to Egypt, it's plastered over all of the ancient um, Coptic Christian sites. Egypt, my people. And that is a direct quote from that chapter. There's a verse saying, Egypt, my people, which is interesting because Israel is God's people. Why is it
Mhm.
calling Egypt my people? Um, I believe it's talking about an end time revival in Egypt. But it says so because they're going to worship together in Jerusalem. But it also says that there's going to be a highway to Assyria. And, well, that seems to mean that the Assyrian people are going to come back. Um, I pray to God that they do, that they re inhabit their ancestral lands, um, that they themselves will have a revival amongst themselves because they're mostly nominal Christians, cultural Christians. Um, I pray that they will have a revival and have a living faith.
Mhm.
Um, but if they're going to be there and Egypt's going to be there, then I don't think Israel ever takes the full extent of their promised land.
That, I was just asking because I mean I never looked up the prophecy on that, and of course maybe I'll learn that coming on in August because we're going to be doing Revelation, Book of Revelation in Sunday school, and I've got to study up on that. But just the way that things are going now, where Israel is pushing and pushing and pushing the Palestinians out, you know, and it's like they're reclaiming everything that God had given to them.
Yeah,
And
may
I
it
was
be
just,
in our days.
huh? Oh,
May it be
yes.
in our days.
Uh, and it just seemed kind of like, how things are coming together more and more. And I just didn't know if there was something in the prophecy about Israel reclaiming their land, uh,
Yeah.
because that was such uh, a, a big thing uh, at the beginning of the war when they were invaded back in October. Well,
2 years
a
ago,
couple of years
October.
ago. It just seemed like something kicked something off,
Yeah.
and started causing this. And now, uh, which brings to mind another thing, Israel is like the size of New Jersey,
Yeah.
and you've got all these other lands around it. How is it, if it wasn't for God, that they could protect themselves from these humongous, larger nations, and not just one or two? I mean, there's almost every one
Yeah.
of them around them are
Yeah.
coming against them.
They're fighting a seven front battle right now.
Right? And I can't see New Jersey protecting itself from all the other states around it. If it was
Yeah.
attacking,
I mean,
you know,
of course, my mind goes right back to World War II and Germany. And, Germany had a lot more land and a lot more resources and a lot more people, and they couldn't handle a three front war.
Mhm. Well,
Yeah.
there's a lot more to that, but
Well, yeah, but
they bit off more than they could chew,
yeah, but
which is just the opposite for Israel. I mean, look at Saudi Arabia, the size of Saudi Arabia, and the resources they have. They got oil; they can buy anything they want,
yeah,
and yet they still are not able to take over or Israel if they wanted to.
yeah,
It seems like they would be able to. And then, of course, you have the 7 Day War. Was it 7 Day War?
Yeah.
It's like, who has a war for 7 days and they lose?
Yeah. A bunch of countries gang up on a tiny little bitty sliver of land with a tiny little bitty people living on it, and they lose in 7 days. And Egypt had a very strong army, and Syria was no slouch either. Then um,
It's got to
it
be
is
God.
God. It is God. It is only God.
It's just it kind of boggles the mind for me in a way. It's just a little tiny piece of land, and all these countries want it. It's like you've got all of your land, but yet you want this little piece because you don't like them.
There's two things actually interesting. One of the guys I follow on YouTube is a guy named Yishai Flasher, and he's not messianic. He doesn't believe in Jesus. He's an Orthodox Jew. But in one of the videos, he was talking about his conversation with Sunni Imam or whoever, a Sunni Muslim person, and they were going back and forth. And he said, "Look, Allah has blessed you so much with all your lands. You have 400 million children. But your own Allah says that He gave this land to Israel, to the children of Israel. So what's up?" And truly, the Quran says that Israel is the promised land to the children of Israel. Clear as day. And the guy answered him saying, "Yes, yes, but we once took it, so it's ours, and we're patient. We'll take it over time. Allah is on our side." And Yeshua was go, "Well, my God is on my side." In another video, last week, for the first time since the reunification of Jerusalem, Jews were able to go up on the Temple Mount and pray and worship and sing and prostrate themselves towards where the Holy of Holies once stood. And it just blew my mind because, you know, the Temple Mount is under the control of Muslims. It's under the control of the Jordanian Foundation, the Waqf, and they do not allow Jews to go up there other than at certain times, and they will they will kill any Jew or Christian who even tries to pray. They will not. They will watch you to make sure that you're not moving your lips and praying quietly. Um, but the fact that they were able to stand there, wave Israeli flags, and worship and pray to the God of Israel, and no one could stop it. I praise the Lord for that. Thank you, Lord. But like you said, something switched. There, a switch flipped. With October 7th, what happened, and I can taste the redemption is near. It's in the air. I can smell it. I can taste it.
That's a good thing. We're at 15, verse 15. Canaan, here we go. Canaan now. Now we're talking about Canaan's descendants. And there's going to be a lot of ites in here. A lot of ites. Canaan begot Sidon, his firstborn, and Heth, the Jebusite, the Amorite, and the Girgashite, the Hivite, the Archite, and the Sinite, and the Arvadite, the Zimmerite, and the Hamathite. Afterward, the families of Canaanites were dispersed.
Okay, so actually, let's read one more verse.
Okay. And the border of the Canaanites was from Sidon as you go toward Gerar as far as Gaza. Then as you go toward Sodom, Gomorrah, Admah, Zeboim, as far as Lasha.
Okay.
Well, let me finish this last verse here real quick. These were the sons of Ham according to their families, according to their languages, in their lands, and in their nations.
Okay, so interesting thing is several ites, like you said. But the first thing is a city named after their ancestors, Sidon. It's a city that's been continuously inhabited since
Beginning of
the
cities.
yeah. It's a city in Lebanon. It was a city, and it's interesting because it's a city right next to another city that we know, Tyre.
Mhm.
Um, and Tyre was an ally of David and Solomon during their reign. They actually provided a lot of the cedars of Lebanon to
Okay.
build the temple and the palace and everything in Jerusalem. They provided dozens, if not hundreds or thousands, of skilled laborers, and this is their first mention. They are descendants of Canaan, so they um, potentially had some genetic contribution from uh, the fallen angels, the um, uh, Nephilim, but until recently, actually, they haven't been too bad of a neighbor to Israel. Right? There were times, but they used to have a good, solid trading relationship. They were allies. Um, However, you can't say the same thing about the Amorite and the others, because the Amorites were one of Israel's arch nemesis. Um, the Amorites, the Amalekites, and the
Mhm.
Philistines, um, along with the Moabites and the Edomites, um, are just uh, horrible people. And I'm not saying this because each individual was a certain way or descended from certain people that they couldn't handle, but um, that they couldn't change. It wasn't their choice. That's not why I'm saying this. I'm saying this because of the culture that they developed. Um, they, in our question and answer episode that just got posted a couple days ago, we talked about this a little bit, but they instituted child sacrifice, burning the children in the fire to their idol Molech. They instituted temple prostitution. They instituted slavery. They instituted incest and bestiality. And it's interesting that it comes from Hum, who was the first person that we know of that um, had incest with his own mother.
Possibly.
Um, More likely
Good
than not.
possibility. Good.
Let's say it has a 51%
Okay.
probability
Yep.
versus 49 something else. But um, the idea is, you know, curse sins can be generational. An apple doesn't fall far from the tree. What a monkey sees, a monkey does.
Hmm.
What a son sees the father do, um, he usually does. That's why it's important, if you are a believer, if you are a follower of Christ, that if you're a man, to make sure you take your family to service with you, to worship together, because your children are going to stay and walk in the path of the Lord with a greater probability than if you don't. Um, so there's that. Now, um, the Jebusite is interesting, right? They were another ite that actually David made a, Joshua made a alliance with. They were the original inhabitants of Jerusalem, and the famous Melchizedek we're going to see later on in Genesis was the king of Jerusalem. Melchizedek is interesting because we'll talk about it more later, but he his name literally means "my father is righteousness," and he was known also to be a priest of the Most High God, the God of Israel. Before Israel even existed, he was serving the God. So, most people say, "Oh, Abraham was the inventor of monotheism." Well, no, he wasn't. Abraham was the first person to successfully influence his descendants to follow in the footsteps of the Lord. Um, the only nation until Christ came and the nations began to accept the gospel. They were the first and only nation to follow the Lord on and off. Let's put it like that. Um, but he wasn't the first person to know the one and only God. That distinction goes to Adam, first of all. But um, even before uh, Israel became a nation, at the same time of Abraham, there was Melchizedek. And that brings up an interesting thing. Melchizedek preached righteousness, he preached the word of God, he preached obedience to God, and his own people did not follow in his footsteps. They, maybe even in his own days, they turned their backs, um, and so they became uh, part of the nations, one of the nations that was scheduled for cancellation and replacement with Israel. Um, but yeah, so if you find a godly leader, a leader that preaches life, not death, and you make him your king or your president or something, well, hold on to his message, um, or her. I'm equal opportunity politician here. But yeah, that's what I got.
All right. Hey, we're closing in on this chapter. So here we go. Now we're going to talk about Shem.
Yay.
And so, in the order that it was given, it makes it sound like Japhet was the oldest, and then Ham, and now Shem, because normally you would go from your oldest to your youngest. But in other areas, we see most of the time we see Shem first,
Yeah.
and then Ham being always being in the middle, and then Japheth. But uh, but Shem is listed last, and it's either it could be for both because he was the youngest and because this is the most significant lineage that's going to be looked at, or they were saving the eldest to be listed last because these are the ones we want to remember as we go on.
Yeah.
And we'll see this. And children were born to Shem, the father of all the children of Eber, the brother of Japheth the elder. So, okay, so 124 is verse 21. But depending on how you read that, are we saying uh, the brother of Japheth the elder, as in Japheth the elder, or is it saying the brother of Japheth, which he is the elder of Japheth?
Yeah.
Japheth, sorry.
Yeah.
So, and it's not really significant as far as who was oldest and youngest and so on and so forth. The what we're needing to really get out of this is Shem is the lineage of the Messiah,
Yeah.
and and I believe that's why they put him last is because we're going to be focusing on his descendants from here on out.
Yeah.
For
But
the most part.
there's also another, like, I have another agenda with
Let's
this.
hear it. Let's get this.
And it's because, if you researched allegedly, loosely, um, biblical topics online, if you've watched a lot of videos on YouTube and elsewhere are not from the most knowledgeable people. It's from people who did a quick Google search and then put something together and just pushed out the door. Um, some of them are people that actually wanted to know more, well meaning people, but just had bad information, or some of them are from people that have another agenda. And you're gonna understand the agenda when I say it, right? The Bible was written thousands of years ago, and it's been handed down from orally from generation to generation, finally written down. And now there's all these different translations and translations of translations. Can we really trust the Bible?
Mhm.
There's that crowd, and there unfortunately are tens of thousands of videos out there made by that group of people. And first of all, again, go and listen to Wes Huff's content. Go to Mike Winger and uh, Bible Thinker. I think is the name of his channel. Um, Scholars that will do a lot better in explaining the finer details than I could ever imagine. They've forgotten more than I will ever learn. Um, but the Bible translations we have right now are translated directly from the um, original languages, be it Hebrew, Aramaic, or Greek. Because part of the Old Testament, in case you didn't know, was written in Greek, or well, a little, not really, not Greek,
Aramaic.
but Aramaic. And there are some Persian loan words in there where we would expect it to be in during the Babylonian exile and shortly afterwards, um, like in the writing in the books of Ezra, Nehemiah, and so on and so forth. Daniel. In Daniel, you'll actually find some, yeah, a lot of Persian words, and they're all the kind of words that we would expect to find if if we take Daniel at its face value. Daniel was written by a Hebrew boy that was trained and equipped to be a bureaucrat in the Persian Empire. So we would expect to find words that are Persian that directly um, come from governmental technical contexts, like satraps and so on and so forth. So that actually proves that the Bible is authentic, that the Bible is true to its original. Those kind of loan words and um, certain portions being written entirely in Aramaic. The New Testament was written in Greek mostly. There are some ideas, especially with Matthew, that it was written in Hebrew and then translated to Greek, and there's some proof of that. There's actually a surviving Hebrew copy of Matthew inside a rabbinical Jewish source in their arguments. So to put that myth to bed, the Bible is not a translation of a translation of a translation. It
Mhm.
is a translation from the original languages done carefully by entire teams of people, teams of scholars, not just by one person claiming to know everything about. And yes, I'm talking about the Message Bible now. And I you know what? For for Message and other, at best, paraphrases that claim to be actual translations, go and look up Mike Winger's um, expose on those. He actually hired other language scholars to look at it and critique it. Done a phenomenal job. Um, Go check it out, please. But the Bible is authentic. Uh, the reason why some people, mostly scholars of the 19th and 20th centuries Germany, is where it started, as far as I can decipher. The reason why many scholars from that lineage of thought say that the Bible was transmitted orally and not written for generations is because of the idea that the Bible was, well, they look at certain portions of the Bible and say, oh, this looks like two, three, especially in the first five books. It's interesting that there's five books, and they say there's maybe four or five sources that were all cobbled together. Um, but that analysis is unfortunately for them very shaky. It's um, I'm no scholar, but even I can poke the holes in there. So um, I reject that right out of hand because the quality of scholarship that led to that idea was very weak, very left something to be desired. But another argument that they brought was that, well, alphabets didn't exist, so they couldn't have written precisely what they thought and blah blah. And then they go, and then um, archaeologists find several what you would call graffiti today, um, words chiseled into stone in the deserts of the Sinai Peninsula and in Egypt that are dated to the days of Moses, where we when we thought Moses lived, and it is in Hebrew, Paleo Hebrew, using a Paleo Hebrew um, alphabet with the occasional uh, Egyptian hieroglyph in it. So basically, we have an alphabet that is expanded with hieroglyphs as early as 19th century before Christ. And Moses was educated in the royal court of Egypt. He knew how to read and write, not only hieroglyphs, but also in Akkadian, because that was the lingua franca in the in the period that people used in their political correspondence and their business correspondence, their trade. It was like English is today and French was a couple centuries ago. So was Akkadian. So he would have been trained in that also. And apparently, the Jewish slaves already had their own alphabet because we see the hand chiseled message on these stones. So there's no reason there you cannot it in Turkish they say tutulacak yeri yok. Like there's it has no place to grab hold by it.
Mm-hmm.
Like it just falls apart. The whole argument is trash. To say that the Jews couldn't have written it, Moses couldn't have written it because alphabets didn't exist. Not true. It's proven scientifically, and yeah. So that's why I'm like that's
So I wish I had thought about this earlier before, but let's do a station identification.
yeah. Let's go ahead. Thank you for the reminder. If our conversation so far has interested you, if you're deriving any benefit from this, whether it's knowledge or entertainment, whether you think we're just a couple of four-eyed fools or um, some guys with some interesting thoughts, uh, please like, subscribe, share, and put your comments in, please. We love to read your comments, um, whether it's a criticism, whether it's a question, because we would love to make another compilation of questions and answer those in a separate video.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes I try to go out of my way and write answers to people, write in their reply to their comments. Uh, if you have any prayer requests, please, we would love to pray for y'all. We would love for y'all to pray for us. Um, yeah,
Mhm. Yeah, I meant to tell you earlier, and then sometimes we go the like the rabbit holes. We keep on going down deeper and deeper, and then climb our way back out.
yeah,
But they're fun. um, Let me finish this out. Verse 22. And the sons of Shem were Elam, Asher, Arphaxad, Lud, and Aram. The sons of Aram were Uz, Hul, Gether, and Mash. That was a good show, by the way, Mash.
yeah. Back in
Uh,
the day,
Arphaxad begot Salah, and Salah begot Eber. To Eber were born two sons. The name of one was Peleg, for in his days the earth was divided, and his brothers was uh, Joktan begot.
yeah.
Go ahead.
Actually, yeah.
Go ahead.
So a couple interesting things here. Aram. Um, what's interesting about Aram is Aram was the ancestor of the Arameans, which Aramaic is one of the languages used in the Bible. It's
Mm-hmm.
one of the languages that it's actually the language of the Assyrian people today. It's the language that Jesus would have most commonly spoken when he was on the planet Earth in a physical sense, when he came in the flesh. So this goes all the way back to this Aram. Um, and today his children live on and his language lives on, and it just blows our mind, right? And it's Aramaic is a close uh, sibling language to both Hebrew and Arabic. um, it's interesting to me, at least. And Eber, or Ever, uh, guess who comes from that lineage? What word is derived from that language?
You're asking me.
Eber is actually the name from which we derive the word Hebrew,
Okay.
and we get it through Egyptian, but because the Egyptians called them Abiru, the descendants of Eber, and they were nomads. Interesting, but yeah. So foreshadowing, Abraham is going to be from Eber's genealogy, from his descendants. But yeah, and to give a rough timetable, right? Because it says, and Peleg, for in his day, earth was divided. That would have been, if we follow the biblical genealogy, or the biblical genealogies, the land would have been divided in his days, and he was born circa 2437 BCE. So that's about the time frame we're talking about. So a little over
Little.
4,500 years ago.
Uh, okay. Verse 26. Yoktan begot Amadad, Shalef, Hazarmavath, uh, Yara, Hadaram, Uzel, Dikla, Ubal, Ab, Abimael, Sheba, Ophir, Havilah, and Yobab. All these were the sons of Yoktan, and their dwelling place was from Mesha as you go up toward Safar, the mountain
Mm,
of the east.
this is interesting, because it specifically talks about Mesha, which is actually, uh, I want to say, in Lebanon. or in that area. And what's important for us today with Mesha is it's where they found the Mesha stele, which, for a couple centuries now, they said, oh, King David never existed. There was no unified Israeli kingdom and whatnot. And then we find the Mesha stele, where the the Moabite king talks about how he, or no, not the Moabite. Trying to remember who was, whichever enemy of Israel says that he fought a battle against the house of David. Specifically mentions the house of David. How do you have a house of David if there's no David? Um, and then he talks about how he beat them in battle and conquered them and all that stuff. So there's plenty of extra biblical proof showing that the Bible is accurate. And the Mesha Stele is one of those, written by one of the enemies of Israel. So they have no interest in justifying the Hebrew biblical account. But even though they wouldn't want to, they do.
And there it is.
Yeah.
So in order to erase that, then they have to erase their history.
Yeah.
Back to a certain point and just say, well, the rest of it we just don't know. But they're not going to do that because you can't list just all your winnings.
Yeah.
You've got to list your losings too. To find. I mean, because look at Israel. With all their wins and losses throughout the history of the Old Testament. You can't have God punishing somebody if they're always winning, so to speak. Yeah. You're going to have losses because of the sins that you committed, and God stated it many times that because you did this, you're going to become slaves of this country, you're going to be slaves of this tribe, and so you can't just have some history and then skip and then go on. It doesn't add up. It doesn't make sense. So
yeah.
Last few verses. These were the sons of Shem, according to their families, according to their languages, in their lands, according to their nations. These were the families of the sons of Noah, according to their generations, in their nations, and from the nations were divided on the earth after the flood. And there again, I think that's we're talking about being divided after the flood. That's also maybe divided after the Tower of Babel.
Yeah, it's not clear. It just says after the flood,
Mm-hmm.
So it could be either or. It could be both, and
it's funny, just the languages. I'm still looking to find out where Klingon is at here. But yeah. I mean, it's strange to me how you start with one language and then somebody decides to change it. And I mean, how do you do a whole change of languages? It almost seems impossible, especially as many languages that we have. It's like somebody's like, let's just do a new language. We'll just make up our own alphabet and we'll make up our own words that means this and that. And that's just it.
Yeah, it's
so it has there again. It has to be a God thing.
Yeah,
where God just says, "This is your language," and puts it in them.
Yeah,
somehow, some way, and it just goes from there. Because as we'll see in the next chapter about Babel, everybody was speaking the same language, and everybody was working together, and they were. Well, I won't ruin the surprise, but anyway, they just all of a sudden they're spread out and put in different areas. Yeah. So does that mean he did like he did to when Philip met the Ethiopian, and he took Philip and took him away and put him somewhere else. Did he take a certain amount of people and just like, here you are?
Yeah, I don't think so. We'll talk about
We'll
that
get
when
that
we get
delayed.
there.
Okay. All right.
Yeah.
I think we're finished with this episode.
Yeah, we managed to actually get through with what we purposed in our hearts, and thank you once again for tuning in. Next episode, we'll be looking at chapter 11. Hopefully, we can finish all of chapter 11. Because there's both not that much there, but there's also a lot of backstory that goes into it, and a lot of different assumptions. Um, but we'll hopefully make it through next week.
Yeah, and there's a lot of. I mean, the first 9 verses talk about that, about the Babel, and then the rest of the chapter is descendants. So
yeah,
I think we might be able to get through that in one episode.
I certainly hope so. But again, thank you for tuning in, and please join us next time for more biblical fun and learning and discussion and back and forths. Um, Once again, I would like to remind you, please like, share, subscribe, comment. It costs you nothing, but it does a lot of good for our channel. It does a lot of good for us towards making our goal a reality of getting in front of the nations of the world and preaching the gospel. So thank you in advance. Love you and want to hear from you. God bless you and keep you and shine his face on you and give you peace.
See you down the next rabbit hole.